Hello everyone. In this video, we discuss estimating the cost of equity capital. So we are already familiar with these two formula. First of all is the price of a stock. This is dividend 1 divided by record rate of return minus G. So this is the value of a stock when dividend is expected to grow at a constant rate. Now, if we rearrange this, if we bring R here, so R equals to dividend divided by P0 minus J. So if we solve for R, we get the expected return. This expected return, as I previously mentioned, is also known as market capitalization rate or the cost of capital. Here is an example. Northwest Natural Gas stock was selling for $49.43 per share at the start of 2015. Dividend payments for the next year is $2. And what is the dividend yield assuming no growth? So dividend yield R, which is also known as expected return that we have seen in the previous slide. So 2 is the dividend divided by current share price. So the dividend yield is 4.1%. So this is also the expected return or market capitalization rate that we have discussed in the previous slide. Now, here we assumed that dividend won't grow, no growth. If dividend grows, then the formula will be a little bit different, as you can remember. So this expected return is dividend divided by P0, there will be a G. So in this case, dividend divided by price, if we have a growth rate, then we will have a G here, okay? So look at this example. Northwest Natural Gas, we have the same example, current price $49.43. This is the expected dividend. Now we have a growth rate of 7.7%. So this is dividend divided by current price. So you can see that growth rate is here. So now the expected return is 11.8%. So you can remember our previous expected return was 4.1%. Now it is 11.8%. So this additional expected return comes from this expectation about the growth rate of dividends. Here is a summary of the formulas that we are talking about. So dividend yield is dividend divided by price. So this is the formula when we are assuming that there is no growth. If we assume that there is a growth, then we will add a G here. And this is the price of a stock when assuming that dividend grows at a constant rate. If dividend does not grow, we won't have this part here. Okay, so in that case, it will be a perpetuity. And this is the formula for expected return or dividend yield or market capitalization rate. So dividend divided by P0 plus G. So you can see that this formula and this formula is pretty much similar. So this formula is used when we assume there is a growth rate, and this formula is used when there is a zero growth to dividend. Another concept is return on equity. Return on equity is the earnings generated by a firm on its equity capital. So this is EPS divided by book equity per share. Now, one point we need to understand that so far we talked about growth rate of dividend. Now, an obvious question can come in your mind that how do we calculate this growth rate? Well, there is a easy way to calculate this growth rate. This is return on equity multiplied by plowback ratio. Well, so what is this return on equity? I already mentioned that return on equity is the return generated by a firm on its equity capital, okay? And plowback ratio is the proportion of the profit that is retained with the firm for reinvestment. Okay, so plowback ratio can also be known as 1 minus dividend payout ratio. So what is dividend payout ratio? Dividend payout ratio is the proportion of the profit that is distributed as dividend. Okay, so payout ratio is the proportion of the profit that is distributed as dividend. Let's say that payout ratio is 40%. So 40% of the profit will be paid out as dividend. In that case, this plowback ratio will be 60%. So as I already said, the plowback ratio is 1 minus payout ratio. As 40% is paid as dividend, 60% should be the plowback ratio, which is retained with the firm for reinvestment. So plowback ratio is also known as retention ratio. Now intuitively try to understand why this is growth rate. You understand that return on equity, as I mentioned, that how much you earn for your equity capital. So let's say you earn a certain percentage. Now a part of that is paid as dividend. So the rest amount that is retained with the firm goes for reinvestment. That actually generates the growth in the firm. That's why the return on equity multiplied by the plowback ratio, which is retained with the firm, is the growth rate, because that basically contributes to the growth of a firm. So as I already mentioned, that payout ratio and plowback ratio. Payout ratio is the proportion of the profit paid out as dividend, and plowback ratio is 1 minus payout ratio. So look at this example. Our company forecasts to pay a $8.33 dividend next year, which represents 100% of its earnings. This will provide investors a 15% expected return. Instead, we decide to plow back 40% of the earnings at the firm's current return on equity of 25%. What's the value of the stock before and after the plowback decision? So first of all, when 8.33 is the dividend next year, and which is 100% of its earnings. So to find out the present value, what we do is simply the dividend divided by the required rate of return. So value of the stock is 55.56, where we are assuming that no growth in dividend. Now with growth, first of all, we calculate growth rate. Okay, you can remember growth rate is the return on equity, which is the return on equity 25% multiplied by the plowback ratio. So which is the plowback ratio 40%. So this is growth rate. Now the value of the stock is the dividend. You can remember 8.33 was the dividend next year expected when 100% of the earnings are distributed as dividend. But when 40% is the plowed back, I mean only 60% is paid out. So if you multiply this 8.33 with 60%, because only 60% of these will be paid out as dividend now, divide by the required rate of return minus the growth rate, which is $100. So you can see that this is the value of the stock when assumed no growth, and this is the value of the stock when you are assuming growth. So the difference between these two is the present value of growth opportunities. Okay, so this is called present value of growth opportunities, 100 minus 55.56. So this is the value of the stock comes from the growth that we are expecting from the stock. So that's the end of our discussion on this chapter. Thank you very much.